And the registrar says, well, everybody apparently is getting interested in this temporary marriage instead of formal marriage, so we can only give you a certificate for a year. And after the year, you either must separate or you have to turn it into a formal marriage.
When do we first start seeing a rise and an increasing number of these unregistered cohabitations?
So what it is we start seeing it rising about 20 years ago. And the reason they call it white marriage is because when you get married in Iran, you have to take your birth certificate to the Office of Registry, and you have to enter the name of your spouse in your certificate. And the reason you do that, it was a law that was ratified in the 30s, was to prevent men from having polygamous relationships. So if you go and want to marry a second wife, you have to show your identity card, and in your identity card was the name of your first wife. And so you couldn't lie and say that I don't have a wife. But with what's called white marriage it's a misnomer. It is cohabitation. It's no different from cohabitation. But Iranians like to call it white marriage because they're suggesting that there is a sense of commitment involved in these relationships. That's not just like, dating someone casually for a short time. So that's what it's called. So it's happening for a variety of reasons. First of all, everywhere in the world, we see that the age at first marriage is going up and up because people have to go to school and become more educated and get a job and then save to be able to get married. So that's the first thing that we see happening. A second thing which is happening all over the world is that the desire to have multiple children is dramatically dropping too. And that's also related to the fact that as women become more educated, they have more control over their reproductive functions. They realize that if they want to make something of themselves in their lives, they can either not have any children or have just maybe one or two at most. And so the combination of these things means that marriage is also delayed and later. So as marriage gets more and more delayed, what are people supposed to do? So the people want to be with other people. They want to have a relationship. And so gradually, so you say, well, why don't they get married? The reason they don't get married is, first of all, marriage still in Iran is a very formal institution. And the man is expected to provide all sorts of things. Has to pay for the wedding, has to pay for a place of domicile. And the woman also is supposed to come up with a jahiz, gift from her parents for their new life. And so when you have a formal marriage, there's still these negotiations that go on between the families, especially to make sure that the children, their adult children, can live together, can live a comfortable life together. Well, what about the fact that men are not in a position, for example, they don't have jobs, or they don't have jobs that make that kind of money, or certainly those weddings are out of reach for a lot of people.
Wedding ceremonies, dowries, it's expensive.
Dowries,
yes.
All these things, right? All these things are just making it absolutely impossible for a lot of people to get married. The other thing is that, so people could maybe get married still, and break these laws, break these traditions, and get married. But then the problem is, if you want to get out of a marriage, is also a huge headache, particularly for women. So, women basically have very limited right to divorce. I mean, they can't just go to a judge and say, I want a divorce. There would have to be reasons. He would have to really beaten her up and thrown her in a hospital or something like that for her to be able to
But the divorce rate is skyrocketing as well. And I wanted to ask if the same economic realities, i.e. the economic problems, the unemployment, the rising poverty, the sociopolitical uncertainties, if that is the cause for the rise in divorce rates as well as the falling of traditional marriages.
Most certainly. And most of these divorces are happening in the first year and a year and a half of the marriage. And the rates are really strange. I mean, going in terms of how they're going up. 2014, it was 20%. I just checked with a sociologist friend in Iran, Saeed Madani, and it's become 30%. So 1 out of 3 marriages ending in divorce. And that's really, really quite high, for a more traditional society like Iran. And so what the newest thing that's happened is I was interviewing a friend inside Iran who told me that her father told her, and this is like a more educated middle class family, said her father told her to go and not marry her husband formally, but enter into a temporary marriage, because if she ever wants to get a divorce, it's going to be so difficult. And then there's the question of child custody, which is really another very, very difficult thing for women to be able to get custody of their children. So then they go to a registry to enter into a temporary marriage with her boyfriend, and the registrar says, "Well, everybody apparently is getting interested in this temporary marriage instead of formal marriage, so we can only give you a certificate for a year. And after the year, you either must separate or you have to turn it into a formal marriage." So it's just this really difficult situation, which is formal marriage is difficult for financial and economic reasons and so forth. People are delaying marriage, and when they get into a formal marriage, getting out of it is so difficult, particularly for women to get out of it.